It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get. Today, we're continuing our mini-series on Drow in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm Ehlwyn, and I'm lurking through the Underdark with Megan and Casey while we reveal more truths about Drow citizens.
With everything changing as D&D 5th edition gets the 2024 updates, it's more important that we don't lose any lore or details that previous editions had to offer. However, even as we pour over everything Drow from 5th edition, it's also important to understand the problematic nature of some of Drow's history. So make sure you listen to our episode 0 of the series and keep all of that in mind.
In this episode, this panel of Dungeon Masters is going to look at some of the most basic NPC stat blocks and how they might be used in a Drow society.
So, in the books, there are a lot of instances where the writers have opted to just use an NPC stat block instead of the standard Drow stat block. There's a little bit of inspiration that we can use when adopting these stat blocks, but don't forget to add the details in the Dungeon Master Guide on page 282. All of the NPC stat blocks that Megan and I will be going over today will also get +2 to dexterity, +1 to charisma, Fey ancestry, innate spell casting from the Drow stat block, sunlight sensitivity, dark vision of 120 feet, speaks Elvish and uncommon. So the following list is going to be made up of only the bolded stat blocks we found in Out of the Abyss, but you should always apply this logic to any NPC stat block you use to flesh out in society. So first off, we're going to talk about the acolytes. So we all know acolytes are junior clergy members, usually answering to a priest, or I guess in Drow's case, they would be answering to a priestess. They perform various functions within the temple and are granted minor spellcasting by their deity. So a couple of things that kind of stood out in their stats. They've got generally low stats with zeros across the board, except for wisdom, that has a +2. And their skills, they're proficient in medicine and religion. So with acolytes, to me, these would be kind of like the female Drow that are becoming matron mothers. Like that's their ultimate goal. And knowing what we know about Drow's personalities, they're going to be catty to other acolytes behind closed doors, but most humble and gracious towards priestesses, high priestesses, and the house matron mothers. They're basically the high school mean girls. Because of their status and the expectations that they have duties around temples or the house, I could imagine that the acolytes are delegated maybe 1 to 2 kind of prisoners to carry out menial tasks to help with keeping things in order. When it comes to players interacting with acolytes, I think that they may experience the same demeanor, snobbish and standoffish, with kind of undercurrents of like a superiority complex when you're alone with them. But if you have the favor of a priestess or a Drow of a higher status, then in their presence, they're a little bit all too eager to kind of help out when they can.
Yeah. I feel these are the ones that are in the school. In the last episode, I talked about how I wanted them to have like an herbalist and like
an herbalist school and things like that. Yeah.
The acolytes would be the ones that tend to the gardens for Lolth, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like as they rise in position, they might have tended those plants for 10, 20 years. And the second they are no longer the ones that tend the plants, the ones that take their place are just like, you know, the dirt under their shoe. Like, it's like, but you were that for like 20 years. And they're just like, I don't even want to associate with them.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I was just kind of thinking of in the last episode when we were talking about Menzoberranzan and how they had kind of the 3 kind of pyramids.
Or the 3 branches of the academy.
The branches in the academy. Like these are the girls that are signing up for like the priestess academy.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And then there's and then one is like sorted to be a wizard and she's like, ah!
Yeah, the post-apocalyptic shit. I didn't want to be a child giver. I wanted to be a
yeah.
My Lanta. So good. All right, well, my first one to talk about is a guard. Obviously, guards are thought to be members of a city watch and or even guards of nobles, etc. So within the Drow society, I feel these will, of course, be utilized within the houses that they are protecting. Taking into account the fact that some houses are higher up in the societal food chain, I think that they would be used quite often. And the more guards you have, the higher your status is. is kind of how I see it in my mind. Or even for thinking city watch, these are the ones that are riding the giant lizards as their mounts. They're the ones riding around, patrolling the cities, doing their thing through the caverns and just making sure that those intruders are being thwarted, right? So for skills, they have an added perception with a +2, as well as a higher AC of 16. So it's a little bit higher than your regular drow. They carry spears canonically, but I think that you can customize this weapon based on what their role is for protection. Like maybe they have sword and shield. Maybe they'd have a full-on like broadsword. I think it depends on who they are protecting, dictates what weapon they have, is something that I would kind of customize as a DM. If they are town guard, then a spear kind of makes sense in my mind. Again, if you were the guard of a noble, perhaps a short sword or something that's more believable that can be hidden. And if you're going into a court, is not egregious and forthcoming, right? And of course, in my mind, within the society, there would be a school that exists for these, or a house that specifically trains and is the number one house to go and be trained by to become official guards of either the city watch, or they send folks off for hire or what have you, right? Like I'm thinking almost like the Sullied too, where they're for hire. Like if we're thinking societal means, if this is the role of men or if this is the role of some women, how much of an honor it would be to be higher in status because you're a guard of a noble. And that is something that would shine greatly upon your house. The more guards you have, the higher your status is how I see it.
Yeah, like the King's Guard, it's like you're the matron's guard. That would be, yeah, probably like
yeah,
made it. You have made it in life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Alrighty, so the next one we're going to talk about is bandits. So bandits are roves of gangs, sometimes led by thugs or veterans, even spellcasters. Not all bandits are evil. Several things could drive someone to become a bandit, like aggression. So kind of think Grits and the Renegades that we talked about in episode 1. So their abilities, they've got moderate stats with a focus on dexterity and constitution that are both a +1, mainly used for combat. Their actions, so they've got a melee weapon or a ranged weapon attack, both with a +3 to hit. Melee has a 5-foot reach and deals 1d6 +1 of damage, and the ranged has a range of 80 to 320 feet and deals 1d8 +1 of damage as well. So with bandits, I think that there's definitely opportunity to create a band of drow that have escaped houses but has yet to reach the surface. They're lurking in the Underdark, trying to avoid both drow in the outposts and watchtowers and the monsters that call back passageways home. They would definitely be hesitant to trust at first, but could become valuable allies if you get in good with them. They have knowledge of both drow societies as well as the layout of the Underdark that could be very useful to you. So whether your party starts their journey in the Underdark, like in the adventures in Out of the Abyss, or if your party has ventured below for various other reasons, you can see the bandits trying to strike a deal with your party to help them escape and make it to the surface.
Yeah, I love the idea that they are like fallen or escapees
Yeah.
like there'd be like a group of like men that have run away from their houses because they wanted to find higher status, but in doing so became enthralled with this bandits group, so on and so forth, right? But I can also see the women creating their own bandits group for hire for houses to take down other houses, you know what I mean? So I think you can play it both ways.
Yeah, the fact that it can be a variety of different types, spellcasters even, like I imagine a witch's coven could have this, right?
Yes.
Love
Absolutely.
it.
We love a coven,
We love it.
Absolutely do. All right, my next one is the noble. So nobles as NPCs in 5th edition are described as folks with more authority over others and or just basic influencers of the upper class. Since, of course, we are dealing again with a society that is built on status and class, you will for sure find nobles in existence here and there. I feel this could also be members of a court, such as courtiers. So I don't necessarily see nobles as just the matron of the house or so on and so forth. I feel like noble status can also be given to those that have influence in the Church of Lolth. So like the acolytes, as they upgrade, they will eventually have noble status because they have that influence over the younger acolytes, right? So I think that it's just a form of status no matter what path you're taking. And so when I'm thinking of courtiers, I'm thinking of the folks that go to court to represent your family. They will have noble status. They will be protected as if they were a noble, but they are just a representation of your house and not necessarily the matron mother or what have you, right? And this checks out stats wise, as they already have a +3 in charisma. So being a drow, that would bring them to a +5 in charisma. So clearly they are built for being social representatives. They also carry rapiers, which I think fits because, again, how I spoke about the guards, if they were to have a smaller sword or something that's hidden in the robe, it's not coming across as physically aggressive because they are utilizing their charisma and talking skills, kind of like a bard, to get them in and out of situations, right? So in terms of how this operates in society, I think that, again, every strain of society has its own form of what a noble status is. So whether you're the matron mother, you're noble, or if you are a noble acolyte, you are one of the top acolytes, or again, a courtier would be noble. If you are the lead of the town guard, you have noble status, right? Because you have influence over the group that you are in charge of, is kind of how I see it. So I would almost not even see nobles as an NPC, but a status point, right?
Mhm.
And then in terms of interacting within the society of Drow, you would dress them differently. So if you see they're wearing a crest and that they are basically being guarded as a noble, you would speak to them differently, right? Because you know that they have a higher status and getting in their good books is required within the society, right?
They're wearing their finest silks.
They're
as
wearing
the
the finest
house.
wolf silk.
Yep. Riding their lizard from the most elite breed.
I'm just with the lizard mounts from last episode, I'm just picturing like carriages
Yeah.
being like pulled by like not just like wagons and things like that, but like house carriages being pulled by little lizards as well.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, and I imagine an amazing plot hook would be if your party, who probably will not have a drow in it, say for one reason or another has to gain a noble's favor. Maybe that's all they know is they need to gain a noble's favor. And so they have to then figure out who are the nobles. They will probably think, well, we're going to have to go talk to the queen or the priestess, the high priestesses. But then actually there are many other iterations of a noble. And so you could end up having them talk to like the courtier that represents the lowest class slaves, but used to represent some other thing. And you consider it's like I'm imagining a Better Call Saul scenario where it's like, I really need a lawyer, and you can get these lawyers or you could get Saul. And so this would be like, you need a noble's favor.
Yeah.
And you
Better Call Saul.
right? And so the noble could come in many ways, shapes, and forms. And so I think that would be fun. Nobles.
So, in contrast, the next one that we're going to talk about is the commoner. So, commoners are really going to be like your slaves and your servants, etc., that you may find within Drow cities. Their stat blocks are the most basic an NPC could possibly get. With an armor class of 10, they've got 4 hit points. They have 10 in every one of their abilities, and they have a CR of 0. So commoners that you come across in Drow cities, in my opinion, are really only going to be used for one main thing, and that's information. They hold the ins and outs of the hierarchy of the house, all the backstabbing and the deceit that goes on. They could potentially be the key to winning the favor of a house's high priestess or matron mother by helping uncover the trail of those who hold lower ranks than they do. Your players would have a moral dilemma on their hands. You know, there may be some paladins that may want to try and liberate the commoners from their houses, which has the potential for backfire and to incur the wrath of that house or the city in general. So how your party would be able to both gain the trust and favor of the commoners while still being on the move kind of semi-freely throughout the town to accomplish their goals, you know, kind of would be a bit of a challenge. It would be up to you as a DM to determine the series of rolls and checks that would kind of either help or hinder their efforts in that sense.
Yeah, I want a coup. You know, I do want an
Yeah.
uprising of the commoners. There has to be at least 1 or 2 coups that happens within the city, right? And it's probably very common that happens.
I would say that they're very much leveraged for information because they're just going to blend into the background so much. The house is going to have so many of these commoners that are working for them, doing their menial tasks and things like that, that they're going to be overhearing all of the dirty little secrets that are happening. And they could be leveraged by other houses or by, your party to get that information to help them move forward. So I think even though they're soft and squishy, they hold a lot of value.
All right, moving on. Next one I've got is the Scout. So these are written as being hunters and gatherers for a fee, is how it's written within the 5th edition. However, within the Drow Society, I could see these being as a very specific house or faction that is tasked with training and raising hunters for raids to the surface. And even just basic hunting parties. So it makes sense you will see these kinds of NPCs around the Drow City. So it'd be very common to see a scout in terms of they're the ones that go on hunts and things like that during the evening time to scout out new places to attack or new places to raid from. And in fact, they would have their own, in my mind, societal structure as scouts. So they would have the noble status of your top scout who runs the faction, takes a group of scouts out, so on and so forth. So it would be interesting to start off playing a Drow PC that you were a part of a scouting party that goes up to the surface to do a raid, and then you get like ambushed and you're the last survivor on the surface and you forget how to get home. That would be a good way to run into either an NPC or be a PC on the surface, right? Is that you were born and raised as a scout that ended up getting lost on the surface. But yeah, within the society, I feel like they would be there. So they do have keen hearing and sight, which of course will help with hunting within the Underdark as well as doing their evening raids in Moonlight, because I'm assuming they would also have folks that go through the Underdark itself and hunt down the things that live down there. And they're a little bit stronger stats wise, as they have a multi-attack with either bows or swords. So they can multi-stab already. So they're more beefed up, similar to the way the guards were in terms of stats. So yeah, that's how I see them in the society. The scouts would exist. There's no reason why they would not, especially because they have raiding parties and so on and so forth, right?
I can imagine you could potentially convince one of them to guide you out of the city through safe passage in one of the secret ways in and out. Like, if you have what they need, you could make a deal and they would get you out of the city.
Or like they've even been tasked to be your tour guide because they know,
They know everything. Yeah.
They know
Every
everything.
nook and cranny of that cavern. Yeah.
I'm also kind of thinking that they could potentially be like your first encounter with the Drow people if you're in the Underdark, but like say that you're in like kind of like a deep gnome city or something like that, where you're not where the Drow are, but you come across scouts that are scouting out the deep gnomes because they like to raid and pillage and take people for prisoner in slavery and things like that. That could potentially be some of your first encounters with Drow as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty, so the last one that I'm going to go over are cultists. They swear allegiance to dark powers. Most conceal their loyalty to avoid being outcast, imprisoned, or executed for their beliefs. Unlike acolytes, cultists are a bit crazier. Well, okay, maybe they're a little more than a bit crazier. They're a lot crazier. Their skills, they're proficient in deception and religion, both with a +2. And then they have a feature that is called Dark Devotion, where they have advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. So with their Drow, they already do have the ability to not be charmed, but this also gives them the advantage of not being frightened. When encountering cultists in a Drow city, only one thing comes to mind. In episode 2, we talked about the Dark Saladrin and the various deities that comprise the pantheon. One of which was Veyron, aka the Masked Lord. It is said that Veyron's followers conceal their identity by wearing masks when in public. The relationship between Veyron and his followers was also based on a deal: complete obedience for divine support. Sounds a little cultish to me. Interactions with cultists in the Underdark are going to be on the rarer side, or at least kind of on the surface level. Because their identities are so closely guarded, there's a good opportunity to roleplay an NPC that, as the party gets to know them and as the NPC gets a little bit more comfortable with them, the metaphorical mask begins to slip and their crazy side starts to show a little bit. This could start out as something as simple as a slip up of pronouns when they are talking about their deity, or the one that they serve, or it could, be a straight up Freudian slip when they say Veyron's name instead of Lolth's, or you could have a party member that is snooping around and they may uncover a cultist mask and robes in a locked cabin or trunk in maybe like an acolyte's chamber or something like that. So I think that there's a lot of potential with these guys.
Yeah. I think when you're thinking of the Drow and the fact they're so devoted to Lolth, cultists as a whole will come up to anyone who is not in the society, if that makes sense. So I love the fact that you tied it back to something that is outside the society to a degree with Veyron. But like I also feel like those who were cast out by Lolth at some point, maybe didn't get turned into Driders, but were cast out to the surface and left there to die, who want to get back in the good graces of Lolth, will start a cult for Lolth on the surface. You know what I mean? So like I feel like there's room for the actual terminology of it being a cult as opposed to just being the undertaking of what Drow society is. It's built on a cult for Lolth, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one, Casey. We love cults, we love covens.
We do. I agree on all fronts. Love it. They belong.
They belong. If you're talking about Lolth, you're talking about cults. It's just how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well then I'll move on to my final one, which is the spy. So in storytelling, we often use spies as folks who gather information in secret to potentially gain the upper hand in a battle, a court, or even just a regular old family feud. So of course, these would exist within the houses of the Drow society. I feel these would be a booming business for a wealthy Drow family that raises and loans out spies. It's like I'm thinking of the anime Spy Family, you know what I mean? Like they're just a family of spies for rent, for house, I don't know. But also be key for each family to make sure that they stay loyal. It would be the struggle, I think, in Drow society, and that they don't turn on them for a higher price. So again, due to the society being the way that it is, I feel like this would happen all too often, that you have a household spy that is either like double dipping into different families, causing problems, so on and so forth. There's probably like one or two spies that are well known, so they can't actually operate within society as normal anymore. Once you're casted as a spy, I feel like this would be a punishable offense if you are caught by the household that you are spying on. Like I think that there's this whole added society that would occur once spies become more dominant in the society, because like if I think about L5R and Rokugan, spies and all the negative things that come with being a spy is dishonorable. So if you are caught, you are forced to commit seppuku or be like banished, right? Lose your house name, lose all of those things, right? Like it is a punishment when you are caught. So I feel like that would still also exist in the Drow society, because once you're caught, no family's gonna hire you because you are caught, you are known, your face is known. Right, so it's like you are now banished and you have to go join the cult on the surface to gain the good graces of Lolth again to come back, right? So anyway, stats wise, they are CR of 1, also which is higher than a regular Drow, as we've talked about. They also have a charisma of 3, so the Drow stats would bring that also to a 5. Their dex is also already at 2, so that will add to their nimbleness, because they'll have the 2 plus the added 2, so they're going to have a dex of 4. It's almost like Drow were built to be spies and scouts. They also have cunning action and then sneak attack options. So they're basically built as rogues. If from a PC standpoint, that's kind of how they're built. So again, I feel like Drow society bodes that they would have them, but I think it would add an extra layer of complexity to your games if you have to deal with them being caught.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I think they would do a lot of impersonation in the sense that you might think you're dealing with a noble for the longest time, and then you are bamboozled because your Drow friend is a spy.
Yeah.
Bamboozled indeed.
Yeah. I think that these are also going to be the ones that are going to be going up to the surface as well, to almost have a bit of like a scout role, not be a scout.
Yeah, I feel like scouts and spies would go hand in hand, that they go together, and then like
they do very much so.
Yeah, the scouts out, and then when they have a spy, the spy would do some of the infiltration and the work and so on and so forth to figure out the battle plan. So I do feel like they go hand in hand and would work in the same raiding and hunting parties.
Yeah.
If you wanted to add them into society in a better, less problematic way than I described.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking is they would kind of either buddy up or be in a group together.
Cool. That was a lot.
Yeah, I think that's it for what we were going to cover on those folks. But yeah, there's a lot of options in terms of what you can do with NPCs. And again, drows are built so, we talked about this in the last episode, so bare bones that you can add anything to them and build a society out of them. And so I feel like you can apply this to other species in D&D 5th edition, but I feel like it specifically is wonderful to flavor drow with this.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, we've got 2 more minions for you in today's episode. The first we're going to spend slightly more time on is the Quaggoth. These are the primary minion in the Drow. They are described in the monster manual as savage, territorial, and will destroy their targets in a frenzy and truly fear nothing. Outside of the 5th edition, they are also sometimes called deep bears and are described as a species vaguely bear-like as a humanoid that inhabit the Underdark, which I think kind of makes you potentially have a soft spot for them, but also get the imagery of like how savage a bear can be is how savage these could be. We actually get a bit of a tragic backstory here. The Quaggoth once lived in tribes on the surface and were nocturnal hunters, had their own language and culture. Then elves happened. Elves are a problem. When they arrived, they clashed with the Quaggoth and ultimately drove them underground and to the Underdark versus face full extinction. Sound familiar? They slowly evolved to live in this environment, losing the coloring in their fur, and their vision further adapted to the darkness. They became lethal hunters to survive, even turning to cannibalism, at which point their past lifestyle was completely left behind. It's a dark turning point when you turn to cannibalism. And in their subterranean hunting grounds, Quaggoth became immune to poisons of all kinds from being exposed to molds, fungus, and many venomous creatures. Having the same elves enemy on the surface offered a pretty easy connection to the Drow in the Underdark. Quaggoth soon became servants and were trained to have some obedience, but be even more ferocious. Drow would enforce their rage towards the elves by bringing them to the surface for raids. Drow even began breeding them, and the more well-off Drow houses would have their own armies of Quaggoth to command. They could also be affected by the dark magic created in Underdark. Some absorb psionic energy, and those typically would become the tribal shaman or the Thonot. This Quaggoth can hold lore and maintain superiority against enemies, but should they fail their tribe, they are then slain in a cannibalistic ritual in hopes another Quaggoth will then take in that energy. So vicious and bit harsh. If we look at their stat block, they are medium humanoid, chaotic neutral, AC of 13, and have natural armor, hit point average of 45, speed of 30 feet, and climb of 30 feet. They very easily climb the chasms of the Underdark. The highest ability stat is in strength and con with a +3 modifier, with dex and wisdom still above average, but intelligence and charisma at the lowest at -2. They are skilled in athletics, as mentioned, immune to poison damage and the condition. They have dark vision of 120 feet, passive perception of 11. They speak Undercommon only, and they come in at a CR of 2. Their vicious nature gives them an ability called Wounded Fury. When a Quaggoth has 10 or less hit points, it has advantage on attack rolls and deals an extra 2d6 damage on any target it hits with a melee attack. It only has a melee attack with its claws, but it can make 2 claw attacks as an action to deal 1d6 +3 slashing damage per attack on one target with a 5-foot reach. The Thonot Quaggoth that I mentioned earlier that has the psionic abilities is one variant that you can use. It has the same stat block as the Quaggoth, but has innate spellcasting using wisdom. It can cast Featherfall and Mage Hand at will, and it notes that the Mage Hand is invisible. Once per day, it can cast Cure Wounds, Enlarge, Reduce, Heat Metal, and Mirror Image. This raises the CR to 3. And that's what we get. Bit tragic, ultimately just became, we'll call it slaves or obedient followers of the Drow
Yeah.
because of the same asshole elves on the surface.
Those damn elves.
All right, should I go into giant spider before we chat?
Yeah.
All right. The giant spider, of course, Megan, we have to have the giant spider.
Of course. Why would we not?
Our favorite.
It is a CR of 1. It uses webbing to trap prey. It makes their layers covered in webs and cocoons of their victims. And I basically will always just think of Shelob when I think of the giant spider, and it's always horrific. And I never ever want to go in there. The giant spider is large in size with an AC of 14, 26 hit point average, and a speed of 30 feet and a climb speed of 30 feet. I would have thought because they're large size, it might have been a bit faster, you know, with all those legs as well. But here we are.
Yeah, that seems a little broken to me. Like, I feel like they should be faster.
Maybe like 40 feet at least. I don't know.
I mean, I'm glad they're not faster, but still, I feel like canonically they should be.
Mm-hmm. But they are incredibly stealthy, with their highest stat being in Dex, but they have a very below average intelligence at -4. They have blind sight of 10 feet, dark vision of 60 feet, and a passive perception of 10. And like a regular spider that we have covered in previous episodes, they are able to spider climb, they have web sense, and are web walkers to avoid making ability checks or have difficult terrain, or to know who, what, and where are in contact with the webs. So you can't really like sneak up on them or hide from them. When you're in a web, you're just royally fucked.
Yeah.
They can make a harsh bite attack that does piercing damage and poison damage on a failed con save. If the creature is reduced to 0 hit points due to the poison, the target is stable but poisoned for 1 hour, even after regaining hit points, and is also paralyzed. Lastly, it can shoot its web at you at a 30-foot close range to restrain you on a hit. The webbing has an AC and hit points if you try to get free, but is vulnerable to fire, immune to bludgeoning, poisoning, and psychic damage. So yeah, a number of layers because they're giant and much more scary, but ultimately still a spider.
That's fair.
Alrighty, let's roll some dice. First dice roll of this episode, and I got a 3.
11.
Alrighty. What is one interesting or unique way that you would use these minions in a Drow campaign?
I feel like this is not unique. However, this is how I would use them in the Drow Society. So we did talk in, I think, the previous episode or one of the previous episodes before that around how we didn't understand why the Drow were not connected to the web the same way that the spiders and the close followers of Lolth are in terms of being able to stay connected and communicate with each other, right? I feel like every house would have a giant spider in their house. And so if their house was being invaded or being encroached upon, you would get warned by the spider like it is your guard dog. Like it would come up to you with its little batted feet and it would be like, there's a thing on the web, or if you see it suddenly being alert, you know to like suddenly start looking around. Like they are your scout in your household. If you do not have scouts, you have spiders. Yeah, if you do not have guards, I feel like this is weirdly enough, because I think the higher faction houses would have giant lizards because they breed them, it's the top thing. I feel like the lower houses on the outskirts, that as we kind of imagine that there will be some poorer families that exist and so on and so forth, they would have these spiders because they're not as visually appealing, but equally as successful at keeping their families safe. Right. So you would have a family spider that you would have maybe grown up with or have in your household as your guard dog, is how I would creatively have them in the household. So if your group is coming up to a town or a city and you're on the outskirts where some of the poorer, in air quotes, houses live that just aren't higher in society, this area would be filled with spiders. And plus, because it's the outskirts, it is the first defense for Lolth too. So that is where she would put most of those spiders, is on the outskirts to like keep it guarded and stuff. So those on the outside are a little bit more accustomed and attuned to having spiders in their houses and wandering around, and you'll see them in the streets. As you get closer to the center city, you're going to see less of these giant spiders because having those guard dogs is less needed than being on the outskirts, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very clever. And like a cue that you're moving into different areas of the city too, if you pay attention.
Yeah, like a good visual cue of like, because the first thing you're going to see coming into a drow city is going to be a spider. That we've talked about that from the exploration standpoint. If you're coming up to a drow city, spiders will be everywhere, webs will be everywhere, all of these things will exist.
Mm-hmm.
But the more you get into the center, the more prestigious it becomes. So you just see less and less of that as you get into the center of the Hunger Games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Capital.
The capital, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I was thinking about is that, drow are so known for their poisons and their potions and things like that. And so spider venom would be such an important ingredient for them. And so, much like we kind of talked about having the giant lizard breeders and things like that, like I feel like there would be, that one faction of, like a drow house that would be the giant spider breeders, but the whole purpose would be to have them for milking their venom, their poison, to be able to make their drow poisons and things like that. So that's kind of one of the things that I thought about.
And would be very pricey to find. Like it would
And
be
it'd be very, like
yeah.
it's a dangerous task.
Dangerous task, and if you aren't a drow, you cannot do it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you have to be involved with the drow society to get your hands on this on the surface.
Yeah. So one of the things that like the people that are tasked to actually milk the venom from the spiders though are like the slaves and things like that. So this house is going through a lot of people. Like there's a lot of turnover because like that job has a high mortality rate because it's so dangerous. But it's like, what is it? I think it's the cuttlefish.
Yeah.
No, the horseshoe crab. The horseshoe crab blood is like the most expensive liquid that we have on planet Earth.
Ew.
Yeah, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for like milliliters of it. And I feel like that's how this like giant spider venom would be kind of in the drow society and things like that. Like it's something that's expensive because drow poison is so known for being so potent and things like that. And it's just kind of one aspect. And you have like these master distillers that take the giant spider venom and mix it with some of the other herbs and things like that that they've propagated and cultivated down through the horticulture society that we were talking about to make this drow poison.
Love it. I've got a couple thoughts on the Quaggoth. I think I would rather liberate the Quaggoth tribes than the commoners. I'm more motivated to free them if work for the drow and they don't look very happy. I'm like, look how sad they are. Like your animal lover in your group is going to be like, let's free them. Let's bring them out. But you can't ignore that they are horrifically vicious. So I would think if you play your cards wrong in a drow city, it could be reasonable that you end up in some sort of underground fighting pit, we'll say. And I feel like the Quaggoths would be, their job is to just go into these fighting rings because they go frenzied and they will like eat each other. And so your party, pick your barbarian. It's like, yeah, you got this. You're going to go and you just have to win. No big deal. And then a Quaggoth walks out. And it's like chewing on the leg from another Quaggoth while it's like walking into the ring. And it's just like, holy shit.
Like, oh shit.
Oh, hello.
Yeah. And then the druid
nice knowing you.
Right?
Yeah.
And the druid on the sideline is like, but I can fix them. I can fix them. Don't kill it.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Love it.
Well, any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think
we like developed a whole city today is what we did.
I feel like we did as well. We developed all of the people in the city. I mean, I think, we only touched base on kind of, what was it, 8 of the NPCs that are kind of outlined in the monster manual. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for creativity in taking some of the other NPCs and reskinning them, to kind of fit in a drow society. So just say take the time to kind of read through those NPCs that are at the back of the book and really just make it your own. I think that that's the fun part about kind of Drow societies and the people that are going to be within it, is that, you know, they gave us the bare bones and kind of the structure of the matron hierarchy and things like that. But other than that, make it your own. Be creative and kick ass.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, then that is all for this discussion on Drow in D&D 5th edition. Please take a second to engage with a like, follow, comment, and review to help push our engagement. And don't forget to subscribe to find future inspirations for your campaigns.
If you'd like to support us, we have a store with some merch and a donate button on our website, itsamimic.com, as well as a Patreon. This episode and others can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and most other podcast apps. Thanks for listening to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're gonna get.
If one of the party members, decides that it's the party's mission to liberate them, all I can have in my head is Mieka going, how much do we really care about these people?
Yes.
I don't want to do all that work.
It's like a lot of work. Yeah.
It's like a lot of work.
Do we really need to liberate them? I mean,
Yeah, so funny. I love it. No respect.
Yeah,
why would I risk my life for Dobby, Like,
Yeah.
These really are the house elves.
Yeah.
Oh.
Give him a sock, Oh Lord.
In episode 2, we were talking about the dark Seldrain. Seldrain.
Saladrin.
We're going to cut all of that and redo again because my brain's not functioning.
Thank you for listening to an It's a Mimic production.
Okay, you're done. Get it.